10 specialists signed off on the diagnosis. The boy was deaf. His father, one of the wealthiest men in the country, had resigned himself to that fate until the housekeeper did what no doctor dared to attempt. What came out of that small ear changed everything forever. The Monterey International Clinic was known as a cathedral for medical miracles. Its white marble hallways had seen a parade of presidents, celebrities, and tycoons from across the continent. If a cure existed, if there was even a sliver of hope, this place sold it, or so the brochure claimed. Maximo Duarte walked those corridors carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. His shoes clicked sharply against the polished floor while his wife, Camila, clung to his arm, trembling. They had just left Dr. Aurelio Fonseca's office, the country's top specialist. The verdict had been a gut punch. Profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, Dr. Fonseca had pronounced, with the clinical detachment that only comes from years of delivering tragedies. Your son hears absolutely nothing. Not a whisper, not a scream, zero. Camilla had let out a whimper that seemed to tear from the bottom of her soul. Maximo, however, stood like a statue, as if the words needed time to penetrate the armor he had forged over decades of ruthless boardroom battles. There has to be something, Maximo had insisted, using the tone he reserved for closing multi-million-dollar contracts. Surgeries, experimental treatments, fly in an expert from Switzerland. Money isn't an issue. Dr. Fonseca looked at him with something bordering on pity, though Maximo's ego read it as condescension. Mr. Duarte, I've reviewed the scans with colleagues in 3 time zones. Your son's auditory nerves are completely shattered. There is no surgery to fix what never worked. I am deeply sorry. You're sorry? Maximo raised his voice for the first time. You're sorry? My son is sentenced to a life of silence and you're just sorry? Maximo, please, Camilla whispered through her tears. But he couldn't downshift. This was a man who had built an empire from scraps, a man who turned a small family business into the region's most powerful conglomerate. He didn't accept impossible. He didn't know how to lose, until today. Weeks later, the Duarte mansion, sitting in the city's most exclusive zip code, had turned into a quiet war zone. A revolving door of the world's best specialists marched through the foyer. Doctors from Europe, researchers from Asia, fringe therapists from everywhere. They all arrived with swagger and hope. They all left with the same line, there is nothing we can do. Maximo retreated to his study for hours, burning up phone lines, pulling strings, offering obscene ransoms to anyone with a solution. But for the first time in his life, his black card couldn't buy what he needed. Camila, meanwhile, poured herself into Sebastián. The little boy was sweet, with eyes that seemed to drink in the world around him. He couldn't hear, so he watched, studying every expression, every movement, every gesture. Sometimes Camilla would sit by his crib and sing songs she knew would die in the air before reaching him. She would weep as she sang, tears landing on her son's hair, while he watched her with that unnerving innocence only toddlers possess. One afternoon, as the sunset painted the mansion in burnt orange, Camilla heard shouting coming from the service quarters. I don't care about your references. It was Maximo, his voice grinding like gravel. In this house, we demand perfection. One slip-up, and you're out. Camilla peeked around the corner to see her husband towering over a woman who looked to be in her early 40s. Something about her immediately grabbed Camilla's attention. It wasn't her look, it was her spine. Despite being dressed down by one of the most powerful men in the country, she stood tall, dignified, with zero fear in her eyes. I understand perfectly, sir, the woman replied, her voice steady. I assure you, you'll have no complaints. Better not be. Maximo practically spat the words before storming off. Camilla waited for her husband to disappear down the hall before approaching. Forgive my husband, she said softly. We're going through a rough patch. The woman, who introduced herself as Esperanza Morales, nodded. No apology needed, ma'am. I understand every family has its battles. There was something in her tone that sparked an instant connection for Camilla. It wasn't pity or curiosity. It was genuine understanding, like a soldier recognizing another veteran. Do you have experience with children? Camilla asked. Yes, ma'am. Raised my own and worked in plenty of houses with little ones. I like kids. They see the world clearly, before we adults muddy it up. Camilla smiled for the first time in weeks. We have a son, Sebastián. He's special. All children are, ma'am. He can't hear. Camilla felt the words catch in her throat. He was born deaf. The doctors say he'll never hear." Esperanza stayed silent for a moment. Camilla braced herself for the usual look of sympathy she'd seen 100 times, but instead, she saw something analytical. "Sometimes doctors don't see everything there is to see," Esperanza said finally. "Sometimes silence keeps secrets that only sharp eyes can catch." The phrase didn't make total sense to Camilla, but she held on to it like a lifeline. In the days that followed, Esperanza blended into the household rhythm with ghostly efficiency. She cleaned, cooked, and organized with a quiet competence that even the demanding Maximo had to begrudgingly respect. But the real outlier was her relationship with Sebastián. While other staff avoided the boy, awkward about how to communicate, Esperanza went straight to him. She would sit by him for hours, locking eyes, using simple signs, playing games that didn't need words. And Sebastián, for the first time in Camilla's memory, started smiling regularly. One night, Camilla woke up with a knot in her stomach. Instinct pulled her out of bed and down the hall to her son's room. She froze in the doorway. Esperanza was hovering over Sebastián's bed, leaning in with intense focus. She held something small in her hand, an object Camilla couldn't make out in the shadows. "What are you doing?" Camilla's voice came out sharper than intended. Esperanza turned, calm, guiltless. "Ma'am, I need to show you something. It's important." "Get away from my son!" Camilla rushed forward, heart hammering. "Please, listen." Esperanza held up her hands in surrender. "I've worked in many houses, seen many kids. There is something about your son that doesn't add up, not the way the doctors think." "What are you talking about?" "Your son reacts to sound. Not always, not obviously, but he does. I've been testing him. When I slam a door, his eyes dart. When I drop something in the kitchen, he tilts his head. A stone-deaf child wouldn't do that." Camilla felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "That's impossible. The best specialists on Earth examined him. We have charts, scans, diagnoses. Charts show what they're looking for." Esperanza stepped closer. "But I don't have charts. I have eyes. And my eyes tell me this boy isn't living in the total silence everyone believes." Heavy footsteps cut them off. Maximo filled the doorway, his face twisted with sleep and rage. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice boomed through the room. "Sir, you need to hear this," Esperanza started. "Hear you? I find you creeping over my son in the middle of the night, and you want to chat?" Maximo lunged forward. "You're fired. Get out of my house, now." "Maximo, wait!" Camilla blocked him. "She says Sebastián can hear something. She's noticed reactions." "Enough!" Maximo slammed his hand against the doorframe. "We're going to trust the maid over 10 certified specialists? Is this a joke?" Esperanza didn't flinch. With a calm that felt supernatural in that room, she looked the tycoon dead in the eye. "Mr. Duarte, you have every right to kick me out. It's your house, your son, your call. But before you do, ask yourself one thing. Are you so sure the doctors are right that you aren't even willing to check?" The silence that followed was so thick Camilla felt she could slice it with a knife. Maximo's breathing was jagged, fists clenched, jaw tight. Camilla knew that look. It was a control freak realizing the steering wheel had just come off. Sebastián, woken by the chaos, watched them with wide eyes that seemed to absorb the tension. He couldn't hear the words, but he felt the vibration of the anger. Tears rolled down his cheeks in silence. Then, Esperanza did the unthinkable. She knelt by the crib and, with infinite gentleness, brought her hand toward the boy's ear. She didn't make contact, just hovered her palm close to his face like she was fishing for something invisible. Then she leaned in, whispering a sound so faint neither Maximo nor Camilla could catch it. What happened next shattered their entire reality. Sebastián turned his head. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't a coincidence. The boy turned straight toward the source of the sound, locking eyes with Esperanza, wearing a look of total shock, like he was hearing the world for the very first time. Camilla stifled a scream behind her hands. Maximo stood frozen, every fiber of his being locked onto what he had just witnessed. "What? What did you do to him?" Camilla whispered. Esperanza stood up slowly, and for the first time her eyes were wet. "I didn't do anything, ma'am. I just proved a theory. Your son isn't deaf, or at least not completely. Something is blocking his hearing, something the fancy tests missed because nobody bothered to look past the first diagnosis." "That is impossible." Maximo finally found his voice, but the rage was gone. It was replaced by something Camilla hadn't heard in years, hope mixed with terrifying vulnerability. "Mr. Duarte," Esperanza looked at him with an intensity that actually made him take a step back. "I know what it feels like to be ignored because of your station in life. I know what it's like to have your words thrown in the trash because you don't have a diploma on the wall, but I also know that sometimes a mother or a simple maid can see what 1,000 specialists refuse to see." She walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "I'll pack my bags tomorrow if that's what you want. But tonight I'm begging you, look at your son, really look at him, and ask yourself if you're willing to let your pride steal his chance to hear your voice." With that, she vanished into the dark hallway. Maximo and Camilla stood motionless, staring at their boy, whose face had changed. It was an expression they had never seen before, the look of someone who just realized the universe is bigger than they imagined. "Maximo," Camilla whispered, her voice trembling. "What if she's right?" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. In that moment, the air in the room shifted. Nothing would ever be the same. What they didn't know was that the truth waiting for them wouldn't just change their son's life. It would burn down everything they thought they knew about the people they trusted most. The night stretched over the Duarte mansion like a heavy shroud. Neither Maximo nor Camilla slept a wink. They sat on the sofa in their bedroom, not speaking, not touching, each lost in a labyrinth of their own fears. When the first gray light of dawn bled through the curtains, Maximo stood up with a resolve Camilla knew well. It was the same face he wore when closing impossible deals. "I'm going to talk to her," he said, avoiding his wife's eyes. "Maximo, last night you wanted to fire her." "Last night I was blind," he replied, his voice rough. "But I saw what I saw. My son reacted. I'm not going to ignore that just because it came from the help and not a doctor with a pedigree." Camilla felt a knot loosen in her chest. For the first time in ages, she saw the man she fell in love with, not the cold tycoon success had built. Esperanza was in the kitchen when Maximo found her. She was making breakfast as if the night before hadn't happened, as if she hadn't challenged one of the most powerful men in the country under his own roof. "I need you to explain exactly what you saw." Maximo sat on a stool, something he had never done in his own kitchen. "No riddles, no metaphors, just facts, Esperanza." She stopped her work and turned to face him. "Mr. Duarte, in the few days I've been here, I've watched your son constantly. Deaf children develop a hypersensitivity to vibration. They feel the world. But Sebastián does something else." "What specifically?" "He responds to sound. Not always and not everything, but certain tones and frequencies trigger him. When I speak near his left ear, his eyes shift. When I hum low while cleaning his room, he tilts his head. A child with profound bilateral deafness wouldn't do that." Maximo processed every word like it was a high-stakes contract. "The doctors ran full auditory studies, evoked potentials, audiometry, MRIs. They checked everything." "Did they physically check inside his ears? I mean a deep examination, not just a casual glance?" The question hit Maximo with unexpected force. He tried to remember. He had been there for every consultation. He had seen dozens of charts. He had listened to endless lectures on auditory nerves and hair cells. But a deep physical inspection of the ear canal? He couldn't recall a single one. "The specialist focused on the neurological diagnosis," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Everyone assumed the problem was in the brain or the nerves, so nobody looked at the obvious," Esperanza finished for him. "Sometimes, sir, we look so far into the distance we forget to look right under our nose." Maximo stood up abruptly. "I want you to come with me. You, me, Camilla, and Sebastián. We are going to see another doctor, one who has nothing to do with the others." "And if I'm wrong?" Esperanza asked softly. "What if this is just false hope? Then I've wasted a few hours of my time. But if you're right—" Maximo couldn't finish. The hope was too fragile to speak aloud. Hours later, the Duarte luxury sedan pulled up to a modest clinic on the edge of the city. It wasn't the kind of place Maximo frequented. No Italian marble, no designer receptionists, just clean walls and a simple sign that read Santa Rosa Audiology Clinic. "Why here?" Camilla asked, climbing out with Sebastián in her arms. "Because an old friend recommended the specialist here," Maximo replied. "Someone completely disconnected from our usual social circles." Dr. Renata Vidal met them in a small but impeccably organized office. She was a middle-aged woman with thick glasses and the kind of calm that only comes from decades in the trenches. She showed zero reaction when Maximo introduced himself, as if the name Duarte meant absolutely nothing to her. "Tell me about your son," she said simply, taking a seat across from them. Maximo started listing diagnoses, specialists, and test results, but Dr. Vidal gently cut him off. "Mr. Duarte, with all due respect, I don't care about the old paperwork. I want to hear about the boy. How does he behave? What is he like? How does he interact with his world?" Camilla took over, describing Sebastián with the kind of detail only a mother possesses. His smiles, his fascination with lights and movement. Then Esperanza stepped in. "Doctor, I've only been working at the Duarte house for a short time, but I've noticed something I think matters. The boy reacts to certain sounds. It's subtle, but it's there." Dr. Vidal leaned forward, suddenly intrigued. "What kind of sounds?" "Low frequencies. Mostly when I speak near his left ear in a very low voice, almost a whisper, he responds. He turns his head, he moves his eyes." "Interesting." The doctor stood up. "May I examine Sebastián?" What followed was unlike any appointment Maximo or Camila had ever sat through. Dr. Vidal didn't hook up machines or order scans. She simply picked up a specialized otoscope, clicked on a bright light, and began to examine Sebastián's ears with extraordinary focus. Minutes ticked by in total silence. Camila squeezed Maximo's hand so hard his knuckles turned white. Esperanza stood by the door, hands clasped tight against her chest like a prayer. Finally, Dr. Vidal leaned back in her chair. Her face was unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Duarte," she began slowly, "I need to ask you a very important question, and I need total honesty." "Anything," Maximo answered instantly. "Who has had regular access to your son since he was born? I mean people who spent time alone with him." Camila and Maximo exchanged confused looks. "Us, obviously. The nannies we've employed. The house staff. Why do you ask?" Dr. Vidal took off her glasses and cleaned them slowly, buying time to choose her words. "Because I just found something in your son's ears. Something that shouldn't be there." Camilla's heart stopped. "What? What did you find?" "There's an obstruction in both ear canals. It's deep, sitting right against the eardrum, which explains why superficial exams missed it. But the most disturbing part is the nature of this obstruction." Maximo shot up from his chair, unable to sit still. "What do you mean by nature?" "Mr. Duarte, what I found isn't natural. It's not impacted wax or a medical condition. It is foreign material that was deliberately placed in your son's ears." The words hit the room like a bomb. Camila let out a strangled sob. Maximo felt the blood freeze in his veins. "Are you saying someone did this on purpose?" Maximo's voice was barely a whisper. "It is the only medical explanation. This kind of blockage does not happen by accident. It was a surgical job, inserted with enough precision to kill the sound without leaving a scar. Whoever did this knew anatomy and had unrestricted access to the boy." Camila started weeping silently, clutching Sebastián tight against her chest. The child, oblivious to the storm breaking around him, just played with a button on his mother's dress. "Can you get it out?" Maximo asked, his voice shaking with a rage he was barely keeping in check. "It's a delicate procedure, but yes, I can remove the obstruction. If my assessment is right, your son will hear the moment I'm done." "Do it," Maximo commanded. "Do it now. Mr. Duarte, I understand the rush, but you need to understand the implications first. If I proceed, I am legally bound to report this. This is aggravated assault on a minor. Someone deliberately crippled a child." Maximo stared at the doctor, his eyes burning with terrifying focus. "Call the police, call the press, call whoever you want, but first, give my son his life back." The doctor nodded and began prepping her instruments. While the doctor worked, Esperanza stepped toward Camila, who was falling apart. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I know this is a nightmare, but look at the reality. Your boy is going to hear." All this time, they thought he was broken, trapped in a silent world, but the truth was simpler. Someone had stolen the noise, and today he was taking it back. Camila looked up, eyes red and swollen. "How did you know? How did you see what 10 specialists missed?" Esperanza gave a sad, tired smile. "Because I wasn't looking for a disease, ma'am. I was just looking at the child. Sometimes when you look with your heart instead of a medical degree, you see what everyone else ignores." The procedure was quicker than anyone expected. Dr. Vidal worked with steady hands, carefully extracting the foreign material blocking Sebastián's canals. She dropped the samples into sterile jars. "Evidence," she stated flatly. "Now comes the moment of truth." Camilla held Sebastián on her lap, breathless. Maximo stood right beside them, a heavy hand on his wife's shoulder. Esperanza hovered a few steps back, tears quietly tracking down her face. Dr. Vidal picked up a small brass bell from her desk. "It's a soft sound. If the pathways are clear, he'll turn." She raised the bell and gave it a gentle shake. The chime rang out, clear and bright. Sebastián didn't hesitate. He didn't turn slowly. He snapped his head around, eyes wide, frantically searching for the source of this magic that had just invaded his head. Camilla let out a scream that was half sob, half laughter. "He hears! My baby! He hears!" Maximo hit his knees. Tears streamed down his face. This man who hadn't shed a single drop at his own father's funeral was sobbing like a child as he watched his son discover the world. "Sebastián," he whispered. "Sebastián, can you hear me?" The boy turned again, locking eyes with his father. The boy's eyes grew huge, a mix of confusion, wonder, and a strange recognition, as if he always suspected there was something beyond the silence. "Duh!" The sound was rusty, clumsy, but it was enough to completely dismantle Maximo. "Yes, son," he choked out, pulling him into a hug. "I'm Dad. I'm your dad." The moment was too holy to intrude upon. Dr. Vidal stepped back to give them room. Esperanza wept silently by the door, her heart bursting with a joy she hadn't felt in years. But beneath the relief, a dark question started to take shape. Who did this to Sebastián? What kind of monster condemns an innocent baby to a life of silence? Maximo was the first to snap back to reality. He stood up slowly, wiping his face, and looked at the doctor with a gaze that promised violence. "You said the person who did this had medical training and long-term access, correct?" "That's right. How old is that obstruction?" The doctor looked at the samples in the jar. "Based on the degradation of the material and the tissue adaptation, it was placed there when he was an infant, likely in his first few months of life." The first few months. Maximo felt the ground drop out from under him. Back then, the circle of trust was tiny. Only a handful of people held Sebastián, and only one had medical training. "The nanny," Camilla whispered, the realization hitting her at the same time. "Griselda was a nurse before she came to us." "We fired her ages ago," Maximo recalled. "She left right after the first diagnosis came in." "Convenient timing," Esperanza murmured. "She left once the job was done." Maximo pulled out his phone, hands shaking. "I'm calling the police. I will hunt her down. And when you do, Mr. Duarte," Dr. Vidal interrupted, "there's one more thing. If she did this, she didn't act alone. Blocking a child's hearing takes skill and access, but mostly it takes a motive. Why would a nanny do this to a baby?" Camilla asked through her tears. The question hung in the air, heavy as a verdict. That was when Esperanza remembered something. A conversation she'd overheard while cleaning Maximo's study days ago. A phone call she wasn't meant to hear. It was about inheritances, wills, and specific clauses regarding heirs with disabilities. The color drained from her face as the ugly pieces of the puzzle clicked together. "Mr. Duarte," she said, her voice barely under control, "who gets the fortune if your son can't?" Maximo looked at her confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Please, sir, just answer." Maximo glanced at Camilla before replying. "My brother, Rodrigo. If I die and Sebastián is unfit to inherit, everything goes to him." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The realization dawned in everyone's eyes. The enemy wasn't a stranger. The enemy was blood. The drive back to the mansion felt like the longest journey of Maximo's life. He drove without a word while Camilla held Sebastián in the back, singing softly. For the first time, she knew he could hear her. And the boy was smiling. Not his usual distant, vacant smile, but a real one. His eyes lit up with every note she hit. His small body rocked to a rhythm he could finally feel. Esperanza watched from the passenger seat, silent tears rolling down her cheeks again, but the way she looked at the boy went beyond simple relief. It was recognition. It was an old, deep pain mixing with the joy of the present. "Esperanza," Maximo's voice broke the quiet, "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." "Always, sir." "Why did you push so hard? You've only been with us a few days. You could have stayed quiet, kept your job safe, Instead, you risked everything for a kid you barely know. Why?" Esperanza didn't answer right away. She stared out at the blurring landscape as if the answer was written somewhere on the horizon. "Because I know what it's like to be ignored," she finally said. "I know what it's like to scream and have nobody listen." "What do you mean?" Esperanza's breathing grew heavy. "I had a daughter, Mr. Duarte. Her name was Luciana. She was the sun in my sky." The use of the past tense hit everyone in the car. Camila stopped singing, her attention locking onto the housekeeper. "Luciana was born perfectly healthy," Esperanza continued, her voice shaking but not breaking. "But when she was a few months old, she started having trouble. She wouldn't turn when I called her. No reaction to noise. The doctors at the public clinic said she was profoundly deaf. They told me there was nothing to be done." Maximo felt a cold chill run down his spine. The story was terrifyingly familiar. "I was young, poor, and uneducated. I didn't have the money for second opinions or the courage to question men in white coats. I accepted the verdict because I had no choice. I raised my daughter in silence. I taught her sign language, lip reading, how to survive in a world not built for her." Tears were flowing freely down Esperanza's face now, but her voice held firm. "When Luciana was older, she got sick. A bad infection. I took her to the ER, and the doctor there, an old man days away from retirement, did something no other doctor had bothered to do. He actually looked inside her ears, with patience." "What did he find?" Camilla whispered. "Compacted cotton plugs, pushed so deep they'd almost become part of the canal. Someone put them there when she was a baby. Someone who had access." The silence in the car was absolute. Even Sebastián was quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the confession. "The doctor pulled them out, and my daughter heard for the first time. She was already a big girl. Can you imagine? Living in silence when she could have heard the whole time?" "Who did it?" Maximo's voice was barely a whisper. "My mother-in-law. She never accepted me. I believed I wasn't enough for his son, that my family was too poor, too insignificant. When Luciana was born, he saw a chance to break me. He decided a disabled child was reason enough to walk away. He claimed the shame was unbearable. It was monstrous." Camila held Sebastián tighter. "It was, but the truth wasn't the hardest part. The aftermath was." Esperanza closed her eyes, and when they opened, they held the shadow of unhealed wounds. "My daughter went years without sound during her most critical development. Even though she eventually regained her hearing, the scars were permanent. Her brain didn't wire the way it should have. Learning was a struggle. Communication was a battle. The window for normal development had slammed shut. And my husband?" The laugh that escaped Esperanza was bitter as bile. "He didn't believe me. His mother convinced him I concocted the whole thing, that I'd harmed my own child just to get pity. He branded me a lunatic, a liar. Then he took Luciana." Camilla covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "I spent years in courtrooms fighting to get her back, begging someone to listen. But I was just a poor woman up against a dynasty with money and connections. I lost it all. My daughter, my marriage, my self-respect. Where is Luciana now?" Maximo asked gently. The silence that followed was heavy. "She died," Esperanza finally said. "Years ago. A medical complication that was easily treatable if she'd had proper care. But by then, my ex-husband had washed his hands of her. He dumped her in an institution and erased her from his life. I had no legal rights to make medical decisions. All I could do was hold her hand as she slipped away." The car rolled to a stop. They had reached the mansion, yet no one moved. They sat in the stillness, crushed by the weight of her story. "That is why I fought so hard for Sebastián." Esperanza met Maximo's gaze in the rearview mirror. "Because when I saw him, when I noticed those tiny reactions everyone else missed, I felt God offering me a do-over. I couldn't save my daughter in time, but I could try to save your son." Maximo turned in his seat to face her. His usually cold, calculating eyes were swimming with tears. "Esperanza, I treated you horribly. I humiliated you, threatened to fire you, questioned every breath you took, and all you were doing was trying to save my boy. I don't need an apology, sir. I just needed you to listen. And you finally did." "No," Maximo shook his head. "Apologies are necessary because you were right about everything. About Sebastián, the doctors, about looking past the diagnosis. You saw what no one else could because you know the pain of being invisible." Camilla stepped out of the car with Sebastián and approached Esperanza. "Thank you," she said simply, wrapping her free arm around the other woman. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for giving my son the world of sound." Esperanza returned the embrace. In that moment, two women from vastly different social strata connected through the universal language of shared grief and hope. But the peace was fragile. Maximo's phone began to ring insistently. It was a number he knew too well. "Rodrigo," he muttered before answering. The voice on the other end was jovial, breezy, completely oblivious to the gathering storm. "Brother, I just heard the news. Is it true Sebastián can hear? That's incredible. We have to celebrate. How about I swing by tonight?" Maximo gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Every word from his brother now carried a different weight. Friendly tones seemed to mask something dark. "How did you find out?" he asked with forced control. "News flies, brother. You know how this social circle gossips? Someone spotted your car at that clinic on the outskirts, and the whispers started. So, can I come over?" Maximo glanced at Camilla, who had heard the exchange. Her eyes mirrored his own internal conflict. They had no concrete proof against Rodrigo, only suspicions fueled by a testament clause and a terrible coincidence. "Sure," he finally replied. "Come tonight. We have plenty to discuss." When he hung up, Camilla stepped closer, anxiety on her face. "Are you sure about this? If he is involved—" "That's exactly why I need him here," Maximo cut in. "I need to look him in the eye. I need to know if my own flesh and blood was capable of doing this to my son." The following hours were a strange cocktail of joy and tension. On one hand, the house came alive with the sound Sebastián was discovering. The boy wandered through rooms, tapping objects, listening to the resonance, giggling with every fresh discovery. The splash of the garden fountain held his attention for several minutes. Fascinated, he clapped with excitement at the chirping of birds in the tree by his window. And when Camilla played music for the first time, Sebastián moved in a way that could only be described as dancing. Esperanza watched it all with a bittersweet smile. It was beautiful to witness this child unlock the world of sound, but it was also a sharp reminder of what her own daughter had lost forever. When night fell, Maximo locked himself in his study. He needed to think, to steel himself for the confrontation with his brother, but he also needed to dig. He began scouring old documents, employee logs, anything that might link Griselda to Rodrigo. After hours of hunting, he found something that made his blood run cold. A bank transfer receipt. A substantial sum, moved from an account tied to one of Rodrigo's shell companies directly to Griselda Paredes. The transfer date was just weeks after Sebastián received his initial diagnosis of deafness. "What did you find?" Maximo jumped. He hadn't heard Esperanza enter. "Evidence," he replied, his voice grave. "My brother paid Griselda a massive amount of money right after my son was diagnosed as deaf." Esperanza approached the desk and studied the document. "This doesn't prove he ordered the harm to Sebastián. He could argue it was payment for other services." "I know, but it's a thread, and there is something else." Maximo opened another file on his computer. It was his father's will, the late founder of the Duarte Empire. "My father was a traditionalist. He believed the business should go to the eldest son, or failing that, the most capable heir. But he also held some archaic views." He pointed to a specific clause in the digital document. "It states here that if the primary heir has any condition preventing competent management, including significant physical or mental disabilities, the inheritance automatically bypasses them to the next in line." "And that next person is you," Esperanza reasoned. "It was me. But my father died before Sebastián was born. In the original will, if I died without capable heirs, everything would revert to Rodrigo. So, if Sebastián was declared incompetent due to his deafness, Rodrigo was positioned to inherit the empire if anything happened to me." The office door burst open. Rodrigo Duarte stood in the threshold, wearing a smile that looked more like a predator's baring of teeth. "Well, well," he said, sauntering in uninvited. "Seems I'm interrupting a fascinating conversation about wills and legacies. What a coincidence, because that is exactly what I wanted to discuss." Maximo rose slowly, positioning himself between his brother and Esperanza. "What are you doing here? You said you'd come later. I changed my mind. You know me, always unpredictable." His eyes locked onto Esperanza with disturbing intensity. "I see the star employee is still here. The woman who worked the miracle of restoring my nephew's hearing. How convenient." "What do you mean by convenient?" Maximo took a step toward his brother. "It's just curious, don't you think? A stranger appears out of nowhere, discovers something 10 specialists missed, and suddenly she's the family savior. It almost feels staged." "Are you accusing Esperanza of something?" Rodrigo raised his hands in mock innocence. "I'm not accusing anyone, just making observations. But since we are talking about accusations, I've heard some very interesting whispers. Rumors that someone intentionally harmed Sebastián and that the police are sniffing around." Maximo felt his blood boil. "How do you know that?" "Dr. Vidal said she would keep the investigation confidential until she had more facts." For the first time, Rodrigo's smile flickered. He had slipped, and they both knew it. "It's a small town, brother. News travels." "Not that fast," Maximo countered. "Not unless someone has a reason to be paying very close attention." The two brothers locked eyes. In that silent exchange lay decades of rivalry, resentment, and something that was beginning to look dangerously like hatred. "Be careful with the accusations you make, Maximo." Rodrigo's voice lost all trace of warmth. "They could blow up in your face in ways you can't imagine." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice, from one brother to another. Enjoy your moment of joy with your miraculously cured son. But remember, miracles sometimes have unexpected consequences." Without another word, Rodrigo spun on his heel and stormed out of the office. A few seconds later, the heavy thud of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Esperanza collapsed into a chair, shaking like a leaf. "That man knows something," she whispered. "The way he looked at me, I can feel it." Maximo didn't speak. He just clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "He is not going to hurt my family again," Maximo vowed. "First thing tomorrow, I'm hiring a private investigator. I'll hunt Griselda down, and when I do, I'll find out exactly how dirty my brother's hands are." What Maximo didn't realize was that the hunt wouldn't take long. Griselda wasn't halfway across the world. She was parked right outside, watching the Duarte mansion from the shadows of her car. She gripped her phone, staring at a text from Rodrigo that contained 3 words that shattered her world. "They know everything." Night settled over the estate like a heavy blanket. Maximo couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his brother's face, that charming smile that he now recognized as the mask of a traitor. Beside him, Camilla tossed and turned, mumbling through nightmares born from the day's horrors. Only little Sebastián slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering over his head, likely dreaming about all the new sounds he had heard for the first time that day. The moment the first gray light of dawn touched the curtains, Maximo was up and dressed. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he had saved for a rainy day. "Mendoza Investigations, how can I help you?" "I need the boss," Maximo said, his voice tight. "Tell him it's Maximo Duarte. It's an emergency." Within minutes, he was on the line with one of the country's sharpest investigators. He laid it all out. The blockage in his son's ears, the gut feeling about Griselda, the wire transfer from Rodrigo's account. "I see the picture you're painting, Mr. Duarte," the investigator replied, his tone strictly professional. "I can locate Ms. Paredes in a few hours, but you need to understand the stakes. If your brother is behind this, the fallout is going to tear your family apart." "My family is already in pieces," Maximo shot back bitterly. "I just want the truth." While he waited for the callback, he headed down to the kitchen. Esperanza was already there, slicing fruit like it was just another Tuesday, but the knife trembled in her hand. "Rough night?" Maximo asked, pulling up the same stool he had sat on yesterday. "Ghosts don't respect bedtime, sir," she murmured, "and we woke up a lot of them last night." Maximo watched her for a moment. Here was a woman who had lost everything, her daughter, her marriage, her dignity, yet she kept moving forward. She kept serving others, holding on to the hope that the world could be decent. "Esperanza, when the dust settles, you have a permanent home here. Not as staff, as family." Esperanza stopped cutting and looked up with watery eyes. "I mean it," he pressed. "You gave my son his hearing back. You forced us to see the truth when everyone else looked away. You can't put a price on that." Before she could stammer out a reply, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Maximo stiffened, bracing himself for another round with Rodrigo, but when he checked the window, he didn't recognize the car. It was a beat-up sedan showing its age parked right at the entrance. A woman stepped out, unfamiliar at first glance, but when Esperanza peered over his shoulder, the blood drained from her face. "It's her," she whispered. "It's Griselda." Maximo didn't hesitate. He stormed out the front door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Griselda saw him charging and threw her hands up in surrender. "Mr. Duarte, please, I come in peace. We need to talk." "Talk?" He skidded to a halt a few yards away, fighting the urge to tackle her. "After what you did to my boy." "That is exactly why I'm here, to tell you everything. But you have to promise me something first." "You are in no position to make demands," he spat. "You're right." Griselda lowered her hands, looking defeated. "I have 0 rights here. But what I'm about to tell you changes the whole game, and when you hear it, you're going to need more than anger to handle what comes next." There was something in her voice that made him pause. It wasn't the tone of a criminal trying to save her skin. It was the sound of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Talk," he ordered, "but stay right there where I can see you." She nodded. "The blockages in your son's ears, I put them there." Even expecting it, the confession hit Maximo like a punch to the gut. "But I didn't do it for money," she rushed to add. "Or, not just for money." "Then why?" he demanded. "Why torture an innocent kid?" She closed her eyes, steeling herself for the words she had to say. "Because your brother gave me no choice." "Forced you? How?" "He has leverage. Something worth more than cash. He has my son." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Maximo tried to process the words. "My boy, Nicolas, has a chronic illness," she continued, her voice cracking. "The treatments cost a fortune. Way more than I can ever pay. When I started working here, Rodrigo approached me. I don't know how he found out, but he knew everything. He made me an offer. Do his dirty work, and he covers Nicolas's medical bills. If I refused—" She didn't need to finish. Maximo knew exactly how his brother operated. He micromanaged every step. Griselda was sobbing openly now. "Gave me the materials, taught me how to hide them so a routine check wouldn't find them. He swore it wouldn't be permanent damage. He said it was just leverage for some family business deal." "The inheritance," Maximo muttered. "I didn't realize the extent of it until I saw you and your wife suffering. Seeing that poor baby living in silence. I wanted to confess so many times, but Rodrigo threatened to let my son die, and I'm weak. I chose my child over yours." Esperanza had stepped onto the porch and was listening to every word. Her eyes met Griselda's, and in that look there wasn't hatred. There was a tragic understanding. "Why come here now?" Maximo asked. "Why blow the whistle?" Griselda held up her phone. "I got a text from him last night." Maximo read the screen. "They know. Get ready to vanish." "I'll send instructions," she quoted. "When I saw that, I knew it would never end. He'd own me forever. My son would never be safe as long as Rodrigo held the leash." "So you're turning yourself in?" "I'm choosing freedom," she said, "even if it costs me everything." Maximo stared at her for a long time. The rage was still there, burning hot, but it was mixed with something else now. He was looking at a desperate mother backed into a corner. Would he have done any differently to save Sebastián? "Do you have proof?" he asked finally. "Something that ties Rodrigo to this?" Griselda nodded and pulled a small flash drive from her purse. "Recordings, texts, bank transfers, everything you need to prove he was the architect. I kept it as an insurance policy in case he decided I was a loose end." Maximo took the drive like it was a holy relic. In his hands, he held his brother's destruction. "I have to call the police," he said. "You'll be arrested. You'll face charges." "I know. I'm ready. But I'm going to get you a lawyer. What you did was monstrous, but you were under duress. That has to count for something." Griselda looked at him with shock, as if kindness was a language she had forgotten. "Why would you help me?" "Not for you," he said. "I'm doing it because I know what it's like to be willing to burn the world down for your child." The front door opened and Camilla stepped out with Sebastián on her hip. The toddler, seeing the crowd, pointed and babbled, testing out his new voice. Griselda looked at the boy, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Camilla didn't answer immediately. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, but when she spoke, her voice was steel. "You're going to help us bury Rodrigo. That is your penance." Griselda nodded frantically. Whatever it takes. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Police cruisers filled the driveway, statements were taken, and the flash drive was analyzed. The private investigator arrived shortly after, confirming he had found a trail of shady money moving through Rodrigo's accounts over the last few years. But the biggest bombshell dropped when Mendoza presented a separate file. "Mr. Duarte, during my dig, I found something else you need to see." He handed over a thick folder. "Your brother hasn't just been messing with the inheritance, he's been bleeding the company dry. Shell companies, diverted funds. He was staging a hostile takeover from the inside. Hurting your son wasn't just about the family money," Mendoza said. "It was about securing the entire empire." Maximo flipped through the pages, hands shaking. The betrayal was absolute. Rodrigo didn't just want a bigger slice of the pie, he wanted the whole bakery. The private investigator didn't mince words. He wanted to erase you. If Sebastián was declared unfit and you were out of the picture, Rodrigo wouldn't just inherit, he'd take absolute command of the empire. The documents suggest he was setting up a contingency to guarantee that outcome. Maximo frowned. What kind of contingency? The PI hesitated. "We found email threads where he discusses accidents with a third party, the kind that look like bad luck." The air vanished from Maximo's lungs. His own brother wasn't just targeting his son's future, he was plotting to terminate Maximo's life. "Where is he right now?" he asked, his voice sounding hollow and foreign. "That's the bad news," the investigator replied. "He's in the wind. His apartment is cleared out, and his primary accounts were drained overnight. He knew Griselda was coming forward." "How is that possible?" "Because he had eyes on her." A new voice cut through the tension, making everyone turn. Dr. Renata Vidal stood in the office doorway, flanked by 2 police officers. "Dr. Vidal, what are you doing here?" Maximo stepped toward her. "I came because my analysis of the residue from your son's ears is complete. I found something I couldn't mention until I was 100% sure." She pulled a lab report from her briefcase. "The material used to block Sebastián's hearing isn't common wax. It's a specialized medical compound, highly controlled. Only 3 labs in the country manufacture it, and one of them is a subsidiary owned by the Duarte Group." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Maximo, one of their own companies, a division that, according to the org chart, reported directly to Rodrigo. The puzzle pieces slammed together into a grotesque picture. Rodrigo hadn't just orchestrated this nightmare, he had financed it using the family's own resources. He had weaponized the legacy their father built to destroy his nephew and murder his brother. "We have enough for an international arrest warrant," one officer stated, "but we need to move fast before he crosses a border." Maximo nodded mechanically, his brain still struggling to process the sheer scale of the betrayal. It was Esperanza who broke his trance, sliding a cup of coffee into his hand. "Mr. Duarte," she said softly, "I know this destroys the soul. Finding out your own blood could do this. It's a pain without a name." "How do you get over something like this?" Maximo asked, staring into the black liquid. "You don't get over it. You transform it. You take that pain and use it to build something stronger, to protect the people you love, to make sure nobody else suffers like your family has." Maximo looked at her, seeing not just a maid but a survivor, a woman who had weathered storms his money couldn't stop. Suddenly, Sebastián burst into the room, wiggling free from Camilla's grasp. He stopped at his father's feet, raising his arms, demanding to be held. Maximo scooped him up, squeezing tight. The boy patted his face with curious little hands, feeling the tears Maximo didn't realize were falling. "Papa," Sebastián said, his voice still recovering, testing the word. "Papa." That single word hardened Maximo's resolve like steel. "We're going to find my brother," he said, his voice steady now. "He will pay for this, not for revenge, but for justice. So my son grows up in a world where the monsters don't win." But Maximo was wrong about one thing. Rodrigo hadn't run as far as they thought. He was uncomfortably close, preparing a final gambit that would endanger everyone Maximo held dear. The Duarte mansion transformed into a command center. Police swarmed the halls, forensic accountants dug through files, and Maximo's phone buzzed incessantly. Lawyers, partners, and vultures from the press sniffing blood. He ignored them all. His focus was singular, finding his brother. "Mr. Duarte." The lead detective walked over, looking grim. "We have a complication." "What kind?" Rodrigo holds passports from 3 different countries. According to immigration logs, none of them have been used in the last 24 hours. That means he's still in the country. Why is that a problem? It means he's trapped. No, it means he's staying. Smart criminals run. They only stay if they have unfinished business. The phrase echoed in Maximo's mind like a threat. Unfinished business. What could be worth risking life in prison? Esperanza, who had been hovering in the hallway, stepped forward. "Sir, we're missing something." Griselda said Rodrigo was watching her. How did he know she was coming to confess? Maximo frowned. I assumed he bugged her phone. But Griselda said she got his threatening text last night and before she even left her house. How did he know her move before she made it? The question hung heavy in the air. Maximo looked at Esperanza with fresh respect. She saw the cracks in the narrative that the professionals missed. Unless... Maximo's eyes went wide. Unless the leak isn't a bug. It's a person. Someone inside this house. A heavy thud from the floor above shattered the silence. All eyes shot to the ceiling. "Who is up there?" the detective barked. "My wife and son," Maximo said, already sprinting for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, heart hammering against his ribs. He found Camilla in the main hallway, frozen outside Sebastián's door, her face pale with terror. "Camilla, talk to me." "It was Hortensia," she whispered, trembling. "I found her in Sebastián's room. She was messing with his ear. When I screamed, she bolted." Ice water flooded Maximo's veins. "Sebastián? He's with me. He's fine, I think. But Maximo..." The look on her face, she was calm, calculated. Hortensia Villanueva. She had served the Duartes for nearly 3 years. Quiet, efficient, invisible, the kind of person you ignored because she did her job perfectly. The perfect ghost. "Lock it down!" Maximo roared over the banister to the officers below. "Nobody leaves this house until we find Hortensia." The hunt was short. They cornered her trying to slip out the service entrance, clutching a small handbag against her chest. Dragged back to the living room, her meek servant act evaporated. She stood tall, chin up, looking at them with cold defiance. "What's in the bag?" Maximo demanded. She stayed silent. An officer ripped it from her grip and dumped the contents. A burner phone, thick envelopes of cash, and a small vial tumbled out. Maximo recognized the label immediately. It was the same compound Dr. Vidal had identified. "You were going to do it again." Rage, hot and blinding, surged through him. "My son just got his life back, and you were going to steal it again?" "I follow orders," Hortensia said flatly. "Mr. Rodrigo said if the boy hears, the plan fails. I had to reset the damage." "How much?" Maximo spat. "What is my son's hearing worth to you?" "Enough to never scrub another floor." Camilla stepped forward, Sebastián clinging to her hip. The look in her eyes was terrifying. Primal mother bear fury. 3 years, she said, her voice cutting like glass. "You ate at our table. You watched him grow, and you were poisoning him the whole time." Hortensia flinched, looking down, not in shame, but in annoyance at getting caught. "Get her out of here," the detective ordered. "Aggravated assault on a minor, conspiracy, flight risk. Throw the book at her." As the cuffs clicked on Hortensia's wrists, Esperanza picked up the burner phone. "Mr. Duarte, there are texts, recent ones." Maximo grabbed the device. The thread with Rodrigo was damning, but the final message, received just an hour ago, made his blood run cold. "Use the maid as bait. While they chase her, I'll handle the real business. The boy is secondary." Maximo read it 3 times, trying to grasp the horror of it. "The boy is secondary," he whispered. "The real target was always..." And then it hit him. Hortensia was never the target. She was merely the bait. While the security team scrambled to process her arrest, Rodrigo had clear air to execute his actual endgame. "Where is Griselda?" Maximo barked, panic rising in his chest. Heads turned. The last sighting placed her in the back garden, waiting for the police to finish their paperwork. Maximo sprinted for the lawn, Esperanza right on his heels. The scene confirmed their darkest thoughts. The garden was deserted, save for a smashed cell phone on the pavers and deep furrows in the grass, unmistakable signs of a struggle. Someone had been dragged away against their will. "He took her," Esperanza whispered, the color draining from her face. "Rodrigo has Griselda." It made terrifying sense. She had already confessed, so she wasn't a threat, but she was a vault of information. She had served him for years. She likely held pieces of the puzzle she didn't even realize were the key to burying him completely. Maximo's pocket vibrated. Caller ID said, "Unknown." He answered, heart hammering against his ribs. "Hello, brother." Rodrigo's voice was chillingly steady. Gone were the nerves. In their place was the flat, metallic calm of a man who had detached from reality. "Where is she, Rodrigo?" "Breathing. For the moment. That depends entirely on you. What do you want?" "Just what I'm owed. Father built an empire, Maximo, and you got the keys simply because you won the birth lottery. Do you have any idea what it's like to live as the runner-up? To always be the footnote in someone else's story? Dad loved you just as much," Maximo pleaded. A cold, jagged laugh crackled through the speaker. "Dad tolerated me. You were the golden boy, the legacy. I was the spare tire, the insurance policy in case you crashed. So I decided to cash in the insurance policy myself. I was taking back my birthright, but then you had to go and produce a son. A perfect little heir to shove me even further down the ladder. I did what was necessary." Maximo gripped the phone until his knuckles turned white. "You're a monster. I'm a survivor. The only difference is I don't pretend I have lines I won't cross." "Spit it out, Rodrigo. What is the play here?" The line went dead silent before the answer came. "I want you here. Solo. No badges, no suits, not a single soul. Just you and me, man to man. The way it should have been from day one." "You say no? Well, Griselda might suffer a very nasty fall, and once I am done with her, let's just say I am keeping my options open." "You have got a lot to lose, little brother. That stunning wife of yours, the kid who just started hearing the world, even that housekeeper who thinks she is sitting at the grown-ups' table." The threat hung heavy in the air. Rodrigo was a man with nothing left to burn, which made him terrifying. "Where do you want me?" "The old man's derelict plant. You know the spot, the birthplace of our so-called legacy. Seems fitting it serves as the graveyard, too. You have 1 hour." The call cut out. Maximo stood paralyzed, gripping the mobile until his knuckles turned white. Esperanza watched him, her face etched with a quiet, knowing dread. "You cannot walk into that trap alone," she murmured. "He is counting on it. If I stay, he bleeds Griselda dry, then comes for my own. Calling the police to surround the place isn't an option. You do not get it. My brother spots a single uniform, he snaps, and when Rodrigo panics, bodies drop." Camilla stood in the garden doorway, clutching Sebastián to her chest. She had heard every word. "You are staying right here," she commanded, her voice shaking but steel hard. "I will not let him take you too." Maximo crossed the room, framing her face gently with his hands. Here was the woman who anchored him, the mother of his child, the one who had weathered every storm by his flank. "I have to end this nightmare, Camilla. For us. For Sebastián. For every soul Rodrigo has crushed. Then you are not going by yourself." That was not his wife speaking. It was the help. Maximo spun around, baffled. "Esperanza, this is not your fight." "It is now." Her tone left no room for debate. That man stole a child's hearing for a paycheck and an ego trip. Walk in there solo, and you are playing by his rules. Take me, and you have got a witness he won't expect. Esperanza, look at me. He is unhinged. He won't hesitate. "Mr. Duarte, I buried my daughter because I stayed silent when I should have screamed. I spent years keeping my head down, letting rich folks decide my fate. I am done being passive." Her eyes burned with the specific ferocity of someone who has lost everything and found their spine in the ashes. "Besides," she added, a dry, cynical smirk touching her lips, "the elite. Men like your brother do not see people like me. To them, the help is just furniture. That blindness is the only weapon we need." Maximo studied her, really seeing her for the first time. The woman who cleaned his floors had vanished. In her place stood a tactical asset, a silent soldier ready for war. "All right," he conceded, "but we do this on my terms. No heroics." He turned to his wife. "Call the lead detective. Spill it all. Tell him we are headed to the derelict textile mill on the edge of town. If we do not check in within 2 hours, tell them to storm the place." Camilla nodded, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "Come home to me," she whispered. "Swear to me you will walk back through that door." Maximo pressed a kiss to her lips, then to Sebastián's forehead. The boy gazed up, eyes wide and bright, finally processing the chaotic symphony of the world around him. "Dada, the boy babbled, reaching out with chubby arms. "Daddy, come back." Maximo leaned in close. "I promise, kiddo." As he marched toward the sedan with the housekeeper matching his stride, the dark humor of it all hit him. He had wasted decades stacking cash and cementing his status as a titan of industry. Yet, in the end, it all came down to a toddler hearing his first words and a vow he had zero guarantee of keeping. What he could not see coming was Rodrigo's own ledger of debts, blood oaths tied to family skeletons Maximo did not even know existed. Truths that would shatter his perception of the monster his brother had become, and the man his father had actually been. The abandoned textile plant loomed on the horizon like a rotting beast. Its soot-stained brick walls held the echoes of an era when the Duarte name was nothing more than a punchline among the working class. Maximo cut the engine 100 meters from the main gate. The sun dipped low, bleeding orange across the sky until the building looked like it was already engulfed in flames. "You ready for this?" Esperanza did not flinch. "No, but I do not see another exit." They stepped out onto the gravel together. The rusted steel gates hung open, a gaping maw waiting to chew them up. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and decay. "Rodrigo!" Maximo's voice ricocheted off the hollow walls. "I am here. Stop the games." Dead silence hung in the air for a long breath. Then, movement flickered in the gloom of the mezzanine. Rodrigo stepped into the dying light, moving with the terrifying ease of a man who believes he has already won. Griselda sat trapped in the corner, wrists bound and eyes screaming panic. "You actually showed up." Rodrigo smirked at his brother. "And look, you brought the help. How sweet. Cut her loose, Rodrigo. This stops with us. Don't rush the inevitable, brother. We have accounts to settle first." He began a slow descent down the rusted metal staircase, each step groaning under his weight. When he hit the concrete floor, Maximo locked eyes with him and saw something foreign. It wasn't just greed or a grudge anymore. It was something hollow, black. "You figure out why I invited you to this dump?" Rodrigo threw his arms wide, claiming the decaying warehouse. "This is the soil where the seed was planted. The old man launched his first venture right here. This is where he made the choices that defined us. Dad was a decent man." A sharp, jagged laugh escaped Rodrigo's throat. "Decent? Is that the fairy tale you believe? God, he really kept you wrapped in cotton wool." He pulled a weathered manila envelope from his coat and tossed it. It landed near Maximo's boots. "Go on, open it. Read the biography of our saintly father." Maximo reached down, his gut tightening with suspicion. Inside were brittle papers, sepia-toned photos, and handwritten notes. He started scanning the lines, and the foundation of his life began to crack. This is impossible," he whispered. "It is gospel truth. The old man didn't build the dynasty on sweat and grit. He built it on bodies. Stolen patents, blackmailed partners, scorched earth tactics. But the kicker?" Rodrigo stepped into Maximo's personal space. "The real punchline is that you aren't his only heir." The paper shaking in Maximo's grip proved it. A DNA test dated 40 years back. A stranger's name attached to a history that had been scrubbed clean. "Before he landed our mother, the patriarch had a practice family," Rodrigo pressed on. "A working-class girl, and they had a boy. But then he saw a golden ticket, marrying Mom for her status and cash. So he dumped the girl, left her penniless, and when she tried to sue for support, he crushed her. Called in favors to strip her of everything, even custody of the kid. How could you possibly know the details? Because that cast-off boy was my father." The realization hit Maximo like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm not your brother, Maximo. I'm your nephew. I am the grandson of the monster who ruined my grandmother and threw my dad away like garbage." Esperanza, who had been holding her breath, finally stepped in. "I don't get it. If you aren't Mr. Duarte's son, how did you end up in the mansion?" Rodrigo looked at her, almost impressed. "Smart question. My real father died young, broken by poverty and bitterness, but before he passed, he gave me the whole ugly story. He made me swear to take back what was ours." He spun toward Maximo, his gaze burning with a lifetime of stored hatred. "When your dad found out I existed, that the survivor of his mistake was still breathing, he panicked. He was terrified the scandal would stain his precious reputation. So he did what he always did. He wrote a check. He bought the adoption papers." A vague memory of legal forms from Maximo's childhood surfaced. "The official story was that I was the son of a dead, distant cousin. Just layers of lies." He adopted me to keep me under his thumb, to monitor me, to make sure I never spilled the secret. He gave me the Duarte name and a room down the hall, but never the respect I was owed. Rodrigo, I had no idea. I know you didn't. For a second, the fire in Rodrigo's eyes dimmed. You were the golden boy, blind to the rot beneath the floorboards, but your ignorance doesn't change the history. He stole my name, my birthright, my very identity. Maximo let the papers flutter to the floor, his mind spinning. The man he had idolized, the one who preached honor and grit, was nothing but a fraud and a thief. Even if every word is fact, he said, his voice measured, it doesn't excuse what you did to Sebastián. He's a child. He's innocent, just like you were back then. Rodrigo scoffed. Your kid was born with the silver spoon I was denied. Unconditional love, trust funds, a paved road ahead. Meanwhile, I grew up knowing I was living a charade, that every pat on the back from Dad was a performance. So you were striking at my father's ghost, not my son? I was striking at his legacy, at everything he built on the bones of my family. If your boy was deemed unfit, the empire would eventually fall to me, and I planned to dismantle it, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, until nothing remained. Esperanza moved closer, standing shoulder to shoulder with Maximo. Mr. Rodrigo, I get the pain. I've had my life ripped apart by powerful people playing God too, but there is one thing you're missing. And what exactly is that line? Esperanza's voice cut in, loud enough for the phone to pick up. Does your trauma give you a free pass to traumatize others? You had every right to hate Maximo's father, but the man is dead. Destroying a guiltless child isn't justice, it's just cruelty. In the factory, Rodrigo stared at the speakerphone with a hardened gaze. You don't know the first thing about me. I know you lost your father too young. I know that hollow feeling in your chest. I know what it's like to feel the world owes you a debt it refuses to pay. Esperanza stepped closer, closing the distance. But I also know that holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. Look at you. You've spent a lifetime poisoning yourself. And for what? You're alone, on the run, losing everything. Meanwhile, the man you hate is sleeping soundly in his grave. Quiet! Rodrigo's voice cracked. No, you need to hear this. You aren't born evil, Rodrigo. You're just a wounded man who took a wrong turn. You can still turn back. It's too late. It is never too late. I lost my daughter. I lost my marriage. I lost my entire life, but I kept walking. When I met Sebastián, I saw a chance to matter again. She reached out a hand, a gesture that stunned the room. Let Griselda go. Turn yourself in. Tell the world the truth about the old man. Ruining his reputation will hurt his legacy far more than hurting an innocent boy ever could. Rodrigo stared at her open palm like it was an alien artifact. His face was a war zone of conflicting emotions he had buried for decades. And then, spend my twilight years in a cell? Spend the rest of your life at peace, she countered. She spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, suffocating. Maximo watched, holding his breath, witnessing the decades of resentment warring against the sudden, disarming offer of redemption. The fight drained out of Rodrigo. His shoulders slumped, the tension evaporating. My biological father told me something once, he murmured. He said the best revenge is living well. I never listened. I chose the easy path. I chose hate. He walked over to Griselda and began undoing the ropes. I'm sorry, he said, avoiding her gaze. I used you. Just like they used me. You're just another casualty of this family's secrets. Griselda, weeping silently, just nodded. No apology could fix the terror, but it was over. Rodrigo turned to the phone. I don't expect a pardon, Maximo. I don't deserve one, but I never hated you. I hated what you stood for, the life I was denied. He paused. There's a safe in my apartment. The code is my real father's birthday. It's all in there. Every dirty deal, every cover-up our father orchestrated. Burn his legacy down. The world should know. Outside, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the air. Camilla had made the call. Time's up, I guess. Rodrigo managed a weak, twisted smile. 30 years of masterminding, and it ends in a derelict factory, getting life coaching from the maid. Esperanza stepped in one last time. It doesn't end here, sir. It's the start of a life where you choose who to be, not who the pain made you. Rodrigo looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. How do you do it? How can you have faith in a wreck like me? Because someone had faith in me when I didn't deserve it. That saved my life. Blue and red lights began to strobe through the dirty windows. Police stormed in, guns drawn, but froze at the tableau. Rodrigo was on his knees, hands laced behind his head, surrendering. As they cuffed him, he locked eyes with Maximo. Take care of the kid. Give him the love I missed out on. Break the cycle, brother. Or nephew, whatever we are. Maximo nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The tears Maximo had been holding back finally broke free. As the squad car drove Rodrigo away, Griselda hobbled over to Maximo, shaking. Mr. Duarte, there's one thing Rodrigo told me about why he chose now. It wasn't just about the inheritance money. So, what was the real driver? Griselda took a steadying breath before she explained. He found out recently that he's sick, terminally so. The doctors put a clock on his life. He knew if he didn't strike now, he'd go to his grave with the score unsettled. The news hit Maximo hard, like a sudden physical blow. The man in handcuffs, the architect of his family's destruction, was already fading away. And standing there, despite the wreckage Rodrigo had left in his wake, Maximo felt something he never expected. Pity. Because Rodrigo wasn't a monster from a fairy tale. He was a broken child who never mended, a man crushed under the weight of secrets that weren't his to carry. Just another casualty of a father they both loved but never truly knew. Esperanza stepped forward, resting a gentle hand on Maximo's shoulder. Let's get you home, sir. Your family is waiting. His family. A wife who had stood by him through the fire, a son just beginning to discover the miracle of sound, and a woman who started as staff but had become the glue holding them together. As he made his way toward the factory exit, Maximo realized the old life was gone forever. For the first time in a long while, the uncertainty didn't terrify him. That night taught him a vital lesson. Family isn't defined by the blood in your veins, but by the bonds you choose to forge. And he would choose those bonds every single time. By the time Maximo pulled up to the house, the horizon was bleeding into a soft morning pink. He had lost hours at the precinct, giving statements, signing endless forms, trying to wrap his head around the truth of his father and the man he had spent a lifetime calling brother. But the paperwork and the police faded away the moment he pushed open his front door. There was Camilla, asleep on the living room couch, with Sebastián tucked tight in her lap. The TV was still humming in the background on low volume, likely left on so the boy could keep exploring this new world of noise while they waited. Maximo lowered himself to the floor, studying his son's peaceful face. This little soul, who had lived in total silence, a pawn in other people's greed, now slept soundly, completely unaware of the hurricane that had just torn through their lineage. You made it? Camilla's voice was barely a breath. Told you I'd come back. Her eyes fluttered open, and without letting go of Sebastián, she reached out to brush his cheek. Her fingers traced the exhaustion etched into his skin, the tracks of dried tears. It's over? It's over. Camilla let her eyes close again, the tension finally leaving her body. Silent tears tracked down her face as she held tight to her husband and son. You were right, Maximo whispered, about everything. My father wasn't the man I thought he was. And Rodrigo, he was just collateral damage in all those lies. What happens to him now? Prison. But he's sick, Camilla, very sick. He's on borrowed time. Camilla's eyes went wide. How does that sit with you? Maximo took a moment. How did he feel? It wasn't a simple answer. Sad, he finally admitted. Just sad. All of this chaos could have been avoided if my father had just been a decent man, if he'd owned his mistakes instead of burying them. Rodrigo spent his life hating a ghost, and it ate him alive. On Camilla's lap, Sebastián stirred, waking up slowly. When the boy's eyes locked onto his father, his face lit up. Pa, he croaked, testing the voice he was still learning to control. Pa, he tried again. Maximo scooped the boy up, squeezing him with every ounce of love and relief he had left. Yeah, buddy, Papa's home, and I'm not going anywhere. Weeks later, life inside the Duarte estate had shifted in ways no one saw coming. The arrest and the airing of the patriarch's dirty laundry had sent shockwaves through the city. Reporters were practically camping on the lawn, hungry for a quote. Investors were calling, panicking about the empire's future. The Duarte name, once gold, was now tarnished by old scandals. But Maximo had made his choice. At a nationally televised press conference, he stood before a wall of microphones, Camilla right beside him. "My father built a kingdom," he started, his voice steady. "But the foundation was rotten, built on lies and human misery. He walked away from a family, ruined lives, and kept secrets that poisoned us for generations." Camera shutters clicked like a firing squad, but Maximo didn't flinch. "I can't rewrite history. I can't undo the damage he did, but I can decide where we go from here. Starting today, the Duarte Group will commit 30% of our annual profits to a new initiative. A foundation dedicated to supporting children with hearing impairments, specifically for families who can't afford the care they deserve." The murmur of the press corps grew louder. "This foundation will bear the name of a true victim," Maximo announced from the podium. "A victim of my father's ego. It will be the Elena Moreno Foundation, honoring Rodrigo Duarte's grandmother, the woman my father abandoned and destroyed." Camilla squeezed her husband's hand. "Furthermore," Maximo continued, "I want to introduce the soul of this project. The woman who saved my son when money and influence couldn't. She taught me that human worth isn't measured in bank accounts but in the ability to see what others overlook." He gestured to the wings. Esperanza Morales walked out, her steps nervous but her head high. "Esperanza Morales is the new executive director. She knows the pain of losing a child to medical negligence. She knows what it feels like to be invisible to a system that only respects power. And she knows that a mother's intuition often sees what 1,000 experts miss." Esperanza stood next to the billionaire, tears streaming down her face. She had never imagined a moment like this. "Mrs. Morales," a reporter called out, "care to say a few words?" Panic flared in her chest, but then she thought of Luciana. She remembered every time she had been silenced, dismissed, looked through. Not today. "For my whole life," she began, her voice gaining steel, "I was invisible. I was the help, the one who cleans the floors, the one you walk past without seeing. When my daughter got sick, nobody listened. I knew something was wrong, but I was nobody. And when she died, the world kept turning." She took a deep breath. "But pain taught me something. It taught me that the people the world ignores are often the ones with the clearest vision. We aren't blinded by greed or status. We just see people." She looked straight into the lens. "To every mother watching, every parent who has ever felt small, you matter. Your voice matters. If your gut tells you something is wrong with your child, you fight. Don't you ever give up. Don't let anyone tell you you're wrong just because you don't have a diploma on the wall. A father's instinct is the only diagnosis that matters." The room erupted in applause. Later that afternoon, the Duarte estate hosted a gathering that looked nothing like its usual stuffy affairs. No board members, no tax write-off galas. This was personal. Sebastián's one-year hearing anniversary. The manicured gardens were alive with balloons and the kind of soft jazz Sebastián could finally appreciate. Kids from the foundation, children who usually only saw these gates from the outside, were tearing across the lawn, screaming with the pure joy of making noise. Dr. Vidal watched Sebastián navigate the chaos with a smile. "The kid is a sponge," she told Camilla. "He's clearing hurdles in months that usually take years. He's tough, but let's be honest, he has excellent teachers." Camilla glanced toward Esperanza, who was leading a group of toddlers in a song, teaching them the signs to match the words. Griselda was there too. After cooperating fully with the feds, her sentence had been slashed. Maximo kept his word. She wasn't rotting in a cell. She was working off her debt as a medic for the foundation. Her own son, Nicholas, was finally getting the treatment he needed, all on the Duarte dime. Griselda would never fully shed the weight of her guilt, but she had found a way to burn it as fuel for something good. "Mr. Duarte," she approached Maximo, looking stiff, "I can never thank you enough. After everything I did, you protected my boy." Maximo cut her off gently. "Rodrigo backed you into a corner. You weren't the architect of this mess. Have you heard from him?" Maximo nodded slowly. "I saw him last week at the prison ward. He's frail, but he's found some peace. Says the nightmares have finally stopped." "Did you forgive him?" It was the question that kept Maximo up at night. "I'm working on it," he admitted. "Forgiveness isn't a light switch, it's a long road. But the pack gets a little lighter every day." The music shifted to an upbeat track and Sebastián sprinted over, beaming. "Mom! Dad! I love this song!" Maximo scooped his son up, spinning him around until that crystal-clear laughter rang out, the most expensive sound in the world. What's the best part, buddy? Camilla asked. Sebastián frowned, doing that thing where he analyzed the vibrations. When the notes go high, he said finally. It sounds like the music is happy. Maximo and Camilla exchanged a teary look. This kid, who had lived in a vacuum, was describing symphonies with more soul than most adults. Mr. Duarte? Esperanza's voice broke the moment. There's a visitor at the gate. Maximo set Sebastián down and followed her gaze. Standing near the entrance was an elderly woman, spine bent like a question mark, leaning heavily on a nurse. Who is that? Maximo asked. Dolores Moreno, Elena's sister, Rodrigo's grandmother, the last of his bloodline. Maximo walked over, respectful but guarded. The old woman's eyes were ancient, filled with a lifetime of being overlooked by people like the Duartes. Mrs. Moreno, he bowed his head. Thank you for coming. I had to see for myself. Her voice was thin, like brittle paper. I needed to know if the news was lying, that Alberto Duarte's son was actually cleaning up the blood his father spilled. It's true, Maximo said, though I know I can't erase the damage. Dolores studied him, searching for the arrogance of his ancestors. Instead, she reached out a shaking hand and cupped his jaw. My sister Elena died empty, she whispered. She died thinking she was trash, that her story would rot with her, but you put her name on a building. You gave her back her dignity. Tears mapped the wrinkles on her face. She would be proud, not of your father, never him, but of you, that his blood could produce a man who chose a different path. Maximo held her weathered hand. I want you to meet my son, the boy your nephew tried to break, but who ended up bridging a gap that's existed for decades. He led Dolores to Sebastián. The boy stared up at the stranger with wide eyes. Hi, he chirped, his voice stronger every day. What's your name? I'm Dolores. Little one? Sebastián tilted his head. Dolores means pain. He looked serious. But today is a party. No pain allowed. The old woman laughed, a rusty sound, like bells that hadn't rung in years. You're right, child. No pain today. Just Esperanza. She looked at the nanny, and the word hung in the air with double meaning. Hope. The sun hit the mansion, a symbol of old money now housing new dreams. The silence was gone, replaced by the noise of healing. Sebastián grabbed Dolores's hand with one of his and Esperanza's with the other, connecting the forgotten past and the faithful servant. He grinned at his parents. Can you guys hear that? The group went quiet, straining their ears. Hear what, baby? Camilla whispered. Sebastián closed his eyes. The wind in the trees, the birds, the music, the hearts beating. His eyes snapped open, blazing. I hear everything, and it's beautiful. Camilla lost it, sobbing into Maximo's shoulder as he wrapped his arms around them. Esperanza, Dolores, Griselda, the help, the victim, the accomplice, all felt the circle close. This wasn't a saga about a dynasty or a will or family secrets. It was about voice. The voice of a maid who screamed when she was supposed to be silent. The voice of a boy who clawed his way into the world of sound. The voice of love that refuses to shut up. In a garden once reserved for the elite, Sebastián spoke the final truth. Thanks for not quitting. Thanks for listening to me when I didn't have any words. I love you guys. And looking around, everyone realized the real miracle wasn't the surgery. The miracle was learning that the invisible people usually have the most to say, and we should never, ever stop listening to them.